All right, I think this is pretty related to the next topic, critical race theory. Seeing it a lot on Twitter. Very few people know what it is, but a lot of people have some big opinions on it, and there's a moral panic right now. And whenever we look at any kind of moral panics, like the satanic panic, the people always have some sort of ulterior motive. They want to they want to change some policy, they want to change something in our culture, and they find a kernel of truth in something that's very scary, and they just blow it up to make it really big. And I think in the case of critical race theory, the real thing is the fact that we're talking about race very bluntly and very visibly.
I think you're giving people too much credit. I don't even think it's that.
You don't.
But
Okay.
I'm hold my mule.
Go off. Take it.
No. I got one ready for you. But Tom being real quiet, he always got something to say, so he can start off this time.
Yeah. The only other context I really wanted to add, though, is just the fact that critical race theory, it's a very specific, body of analysis and theory. And for example, like I teach Du Bois, I teach Angela Davis, I teach a lot of local activists like Marion Stamps in Chicago, through their speeches and their activism. This would not be considered critical race theory,
because it's not
in the world of people who actually study critical race theory, and yet that kind of work is being called critical race theory. Like any mention of racial analysis. Where do you all think this moral panic is coming from? There's always a root, but I'm just wondering where. And Janelle, I know you got it ready.
I'm dying, but I'm going to be quiet for like 30 seconds and I'm going to let somebody else start this off.
I don't really know the origins of kind of where it started from, but it seems like it's just the natural progression of a buzzword that just kind of catches fire in a certain circle. And it's like when my coal mining brother-in-law is coming to me bitching about critical race theory, I know that like the tentacles
the shark.
Yeah, it's exactly right. So I don't really have a strong opinion about it, except to say that we did a bit on the show about it. And not really even a bit. It was just like we kind of treated it like it was sort of much ado about nothing. You know what I mean? Which I think that is the case, as far as these people are concerned that are like just are obsessing over this now. And like people thought we were being so flippant with that. And we're saying, because what we said was like me, Terrence, and Aaron. And we're like, Aaron grew up in New York City. Terrence grew up in West Texas and New Mexico. I grew up in the mountains. And it's like, just by show of hands here, who here was taught critical race theory in public schools? And it's like, no. And that's a pretty good mix of places to be from, So it was just, anyway.
So I promise I won't talk too much on this question, but I would just say this. We don't need to question where it came from. We know where it came from. It's a guy named Christopher Rufo, excuse me. He's from the Manhattan Institute, which is a conservative think tank, propaganda outlet. And he specifically went out there and said, I'm going to manufacture this thing that I made up called critical race theory. It's the same thing as the Tea Party. The Tea Party was founded in Chicago on the Board of Trade on the floor by a CNBC guy saying that he didn't want to pay the mortgages of the guy next to him during the financial crisis.
That's right.
And they flipped out over something that never happened. Obama did not pay the mortgages of all those people. Millions of people were foreclosed on. African-American wealth was destroyed in this country, and a lot of middle-class people lost their homes of all races. Similarly, with critical race theory, it's just a theory that it's a couple things. It says theory, which conservatives were primed to be suspicious of, especially Southern conservatives, because they think evolution's just a theory.
And some leftists too. It's the word theory.
Yeah, it says race. So you say race to a white person, they're going to lose their shit.
But then you also append critical.
Oh my God. Now you're complaining. You're automatically criticizing.
That's correct.
So this was, it's as somebody who actually did do critical race theory, because I went to a public law school at the University of Pittsburgh and I took a class called Race and the Law. So I actually took critical race theory, and it was a third year law level course. There is no fucking way that any of you took critical race theory, because I had to electively take it at the third year at law school. This is not something people are taught. All right. And let me tell you, if you actually took critical race theory, it would make you quite angry. They're right about that. They're right about that. If you actually understood how law was used to construct race in this country, if you knew that we had laws saying that basically white people could kill black people with impunity for hundreds of years, if you understood that there is a legal decision that says that kids in this country do not have a right to an education.
That's right.
If you understood the real roots, Plessy v. Ferguson and Dred Scott, and you really studied the legal institutions and how they were created, and redlining and restrictive covenants, and you went through the history of law and how it's been used to construct race and enforce racial segregation, even after the civil rights movement, you'd be quite pissed if you learned about the segregation academies that closed down public schools in Virginia for 5 years after Brown versus Board of Education. You hear me that right. In Virginia, when they heard that they couldn't segregate anymore, they shut down every public school in the state and said, fine, if we can't segregate, we won't fund public schools for any kid.
Yeah,
if you actually knew that history, you might be pissed and you might think, hey, maybe race has affected us up until this day. Anyway, sorry for the rant. It's just one of those things that to me is so ridiculous, so absurd. And I wish Americans really did hear critical race theory, because then they might understand why we have some of the problems that we have to this day and what real solutions look like.
Go ahead, Tom. You were about to say something.
Oh, no, I was just going to tack on to what he was talking about in the school shutdown in Virginia. And I think this is probably 2000. God, I'm not even sure when, maybe the early to mid aughts sometime. The highest performing school in Mississippi was mostly black school in the Delta that produced Mississippi. A national teacher of the year was shut down in a similar fashion. And it's like,
I wanted to extend what Mike was saying. Critical race theory is 100% a right-wing confection, because they need an instrument for the midterm 2020s. Because if I'm reading things correctly, it looks like the themes that are emerging for the midterms, which I'm going to try to not have an aneurysm as I go through this. The themes that are emerging for the midterms are critical race theory, cops, and like bathrooms. Not that we just came out of a once in a century pandemic and anyone can run on like raising the wage floor or Medicare for all, again, because we just got through a pandemic, or any of these like very like material bread and butter things that like people would identify with. No. It's going to be bathrooms, cops, and critical race theory. Critical race theory in particular, because Democrats and Chuck Schumer were correct in their little shitty strategy about like, what was it? Every voter every blue collar voter we lose in
Western Pennsylvania, we're going to gain 2 in the Philadelphia suburb.
That's right. He was right, but he was wrong. He was right, but he was wrong. He was right in that strategy. Just Hillary was such an odious candidate that didn't work out with her, but it absolutely worked with Joe Biden. And because the coalition that like pushed him over the top in 2020 was largely suburbanites, white men, and independents, we have to like we have to kind of allow themes to form that will allow us to play a little bit more offense on these things, in the hopes of being able to like continue to siphon off that this just enough the electorate that maybe we don't get our ass handed to us in 2022. However, I think that's a losing strategy, because how many seats do Republicans net need to pick up in the Senate? Just one.
Yeah.
Just one. And one of those seats is goddamn Raphael Warnock, who owes everybody $600. So it's like, and how do we think the critical race theory is going to play in Georgia during the midterms? Like, that's a losing message to even try and siphon off, respectable, woke suburbanites, particularly in Georgia. So it's like, it's a losing proposition, but because there's not a ton to run on offensively for Democrats, they'll end up having to like play defense with this. But it's completely a right-wing confection that like nobody knows what it means, because it's not a specter. Similarly to I'm walking a little heavy right now. Similarly to how, my opinion, Democrats miscalculated with like the trans kids bathroom issue in 2016. Like, you didn't hear about that after the fucking election because it was purely instrumental. You're not going to hear about critical race theory in 2023 because that's not the point. Isn't to like have this become, a part of, general American discourse. I just need to froth up enough people for 2022 and, have, lovely suburban white women and white men maybe feel just uncomfortable enough with the idea that their child is being, radicalized in school to like, vote Rand Paul in again. You know what I mean? Like, it's a losing proposition, but what else do they have to be offensive about? If they get their shit together on like student debt, which I interviewed Melissa Byrne, that's coming out in a couple of weeks. She has me hopeful about that. If they get their shit together on student loans, I see your face, Mike, I know. Then, they've got a better chance. If, they punted, they, did the Lucy football okey doke with minimum wage, which was like a gimme.
75% support, including like 45. That's got like majority support with the Republicans, but they can't even do that.
That's right. But it's just like you didn't run on anything that people can hold on. I mean, sorry, you did not. They so far have not delivered much that people can hold on their hand. They didn't even beat giving out bigger checks than Donald Trump. Like
nope.
So here we are.
You sent out 1,800. They sent out 14
bathrooms and CRT. What?
Well, so like to build on like the electoral stuff just for a second. Like, obviously the Democrats, this is one of the least productive Congresses ever, and I often heard people talking about Joe Biden, comparing him to FDR, and I often talk to people and say that FDR passed 17 major pieces of legislation in his first 100 days, and Joe Biden passed one. He's not
one that was going
FDR.
To get passed anyway, whether or not he was president.
Right. Yeah. So he's not doing much, and they haven't passed much in the way of laws. And the thing that I'm really concerned about is kind of like the structural disadvantage of like left-leaning people, period, being permatized in a way. It is being turned into like just a feature of American society, kind of a pseudo-apartheid, where just people of color, left-leaning people, young people's votes are going to be downweighted to such an extreme degree that, maybe Democratic presidents can win, nationwide. But as far as like in the legislature, a person in Wyoming has 80 times the electoral power in the Senate that someone does in California. The gerrymandering that they're planning on doing, because they're allowed to draw the districts because the Democrats won't pass HR 1, which prevents political gerrymandering. And because
Democrats keep getting their ass handed to them in local and state elections.
Well, they get their ass handed doubly because it's gerrymandered at the state and local level. Fair. And so, and the thing about gerrymandering is it's very effective. It's the same. And, I think the Republicans are right about one thing. If we're going to do our electoral takes, I think Joe Biden won because of COVID-19.
100%. No pandemic, no Biden.
One, because Trump fucked it up. And two, because of vote by mail. Vote by mail gave Joe Biden the highest turnout that we've had in over 100 years. Nobody was as excited to run out and vote for Biden as they were for Obama in 2008, as an example, as much as he was a disappointment. They voted because it was easy and there was a good system. And the Republicans are right to say we would have won Georgia. We would have won Arizona. We would have won these other states that we barely lost. But it was that goddamn vote by mail. And they're going with a plan. And they're executing their plan, and they're getting away with everything they can get away with in order to achieve victory. Meanwhile, the Democrats, and they're doing it on party line votes down in these state legislatures. They don't care if a Democrat votes for that with them on their voter suppression. But at the federal level, we have to pretend like Joe Manchin cares about getting 10 Republican votes.
We also have to pretend that he can't be primaried. We also have to pretend that the party apparatus is subordinate to him, which also makes me crazy. Like,
of course,
that's not something that can't be contested. It's a choice.
Sometimes I tell a story. Like, listen, I know FDR and LBJ have they're problematic to say the least from a leftist perspective, but they did do a few things.
LBJ understood power.
Exactly.
He would look you in the face while he was taking a shit and whip some votes. And
So I don't know if you guys know this, but his dick had a name, and it was Jumbo. And whenever he had a recalcitrant Democrat who wouldn't vote for the Civil Rights Act or something, he literally would bring him into the White House And when they were whipping votes for the Civil Rights Act, he took his dick out and he would take a piss right in front of the guy and be like, have you ever seen anything like this? You're going to vote for it. Now, this is toxic masculinity, chat. This is bad. I'm not saying show your dick to people, but the point is.
But if it gets Joe Manchin on the level, I'll let it slide.
Exactly. Because I wanted the Civil Rights Act. I want the Voting Rights Act. I want Medicare. They did Medicare and they did it in 2 years. They didn't have computers back then. They went door to door and they registered every granny and every grandpa. That's what they did to get Medicare for seniors when he passed it. So that's what it really takes. And to know Joe Biden, and according to a story I read a month ago, hopefully it's changed since then, but probably not. Joe Biden never once picked up the phone and even talked to Joe Manchin about HR1 or the PRO Act or a bunch of really good pieces of legislation that
or talking him into abolishing the filibuster,
marijuana, and there's all this stuff he can do on his own too. I'm sorry for ranting about Joe Biden. This is like my thing I rant about a lot, so I can go on this all day. But like he could legalize marijuana at the federal level. That is an executive branch function according to the Controlled Substances Act. He could erase student debt tomorrow. He can do all this stuff that he's not doing. You guys mentioned antitrust. Joe Biden has not appointed anybody at Department of Justice as in head charge of antitrust. Well, that job is vacant. Now we have a good person, the FTC.
Yeah, he is actually he's doing not enough because it's not legislation, but he is signaling like two, I think one really important kind of antitrust gesture via executive order for the maritime and shipping industry to deconcentrate that. Again, it's all right, but it's not legislation. So it's something, but I guess.
No, she's great. Listen, this is when you get a Democrat. You're going to get some random good people that slip in, and you're going to be able to hold on to that so you don't lose your mind. That was the reason that Bernie Sanders did everything he could to help him with things like this.
Sure.
And listen, I'm worried. We got Roe v. Wade. We just had a huge defeat on the Voting Rights Act that was 6-3. It was devastating.
Yeah.
And the more bad shit's going to be happening. And, the right wing is really losing it. I watched a lot of what they say frequently. They were cheering the fact that the vaccine, rollout has gone down. That stuff, that's pretty disgusting. The idea that we're not going to vaccinate people and they're going to die needlessly over a disease that we figured out how to handle is just wild.